This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you might have missed this morning. We also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 17th of February 2021 and I am Miss Gay.
I'm Tom.
And I am JM. In case you missed the headlines this morning, here they are. In the Daily Nation, higher taxes, job cuts as IMF returns. In the Standard, newly minted Unity Alliance shapes up. And in the Star, blow to DP RUTO as MPs reject multiple question. Shall we begin with the Daily Nation? Very alarming.
Absolutely. It is very alarming. Higher taxes, job cuts as IMF returns, but it should not be alarming. Now, the gist of the Nation's headline is to basically say Kibaki kept off the IMF, but UHURU is dependent on them. It is to imply that Kenya is on its way back to structural adjustments. It is also to imply that Kibaki at no point ever needed the IMF and was always self-reliant. We want to debunk this narrative. In the year 2009, Kenya's economy had tanked. And this is because we had just been hit by two tragedies. One was the post-election violence of 2008. And two, like the rest of the world, Kenya was affected by the global financial crisis. Mind you, the economy was growing at 1.6%. So what did the Kibaki administration do? They went to IMF and begged for a loan of $200 million. It was an emergency loan. The IMF gave it to them. And this is what restarted our economy. Now, then Kenya's GDP was a paltry $35 billion. It is now at about $110 billion, nearly 4 times as big. Our economic growth now is the same as 2008 and 2009, which is about 1.6% again. Now, question is, if we asked for an emergency loan then, why should we not ask for one now? And what is wrong with getting a loan after getting through Corona anyway? In July last year, South Africa got a $4.3 billion loan from the IMF. Nigeria got a $3.4 billion loan from the IMF. Egypt got a $5.2 billion loan from the IMF. Rwanda got $110 million from the IMF. So why does the nation think Kenya should be the exception? Not to you Kenyans. Don't allow your feelings to be disturbed by journalists that do not read. Britain had our entire national debt in 1919, over 40 billion sterling pounds. They accrued war debts from the 1800s and 1900s. And guess what? They finished paying them off in 2015, just 6 years ago. So who are we?
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. Very good debunking there of the Daily Nation. We've got a 3-part criteria that we use to assess the headlines. Are they topical or speculative, repetitive or groundbreaking, and thoughtful or just plain lazy? This is speculative.
And lazy.
This is lazy journalism.
It's rubbish.
This is misleading. So we're going to toss that with a lot of gusto. On to the Star.
I think I'll take a look at that. So according to the Star, you can all breathe a collective sigh of relief. And why will you be doing this? You do not have to have multiple questions in the BBI referendum. So the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, combined with the Constitutional Implementation Oversight Committee, unanimously agreed that there will be no referendum options, or what the DP's people call multiple questions in the referendum. You will simply be required to either vote yes for the whole amendment or no against the whole amendment. There will be no multiple choice questions reminiscent of the horrors of KCPE. But I'd like to say this, even with a single question, a referendum is a very complicated form of voting. The issues in a referendum are usually complex, and the wording of that single referendum question can be too hard even for the average voter to understand. And this confusion can lead the voters to change the referendum question in their minds, so that when the voters show up at the ballot, they will vote for a different question, not the one that was asked, but the one they want to answer. And this is what happened in the Bahamas when they held a referendum in June 2016. The referendum was about gender equality, pretty simple. But the opposition confused the conservative Christian voters. They told the Christians that the referendum was going to legalize same-sex marriage and LGBT rights. That is how the Bahamas referendum for equal rights for men and women failed. And I'm going to say this, maybe the DP and his allies were not without a point when they called for the breakdown of the referendum into multiple questions. Their logic is borrowed from Harry Truman, who said, if you can't convince the masses, confuse them.
Absolutely.
So give them so many referendum questions that they will not know what they are voting on. However, as Truman also said, this is an old political trick. And this time, it just will not work.
you know, Mrs. K, absolutely. And there is no way William Ruto can tell us BBI is not a priority. And in the same breath, he tells us we want a multiple question referendum.
It's true.
I mean, which is which?
They want to confuse the masses. They just vote. They don't know what they're voting in.
Yeah, but do they think we are that dumb? They think we are all brought up in Kamagot or what?
Yeah, and that is exactly what David Murathe was asking on SMS yesterday. On television, you know. Surely, this double speak, it's going to come to an end.
Yeah, I mean...
And it will. Today, we've got now 7 counties that have voted yes.
Excellent.
County assemblies that voted yes in favor of BBI. And so it'll go to the people, and we'll drive them out of town. Finally, I think we put that paper in the parking bay. You consider the standard. And here we've got newly minted Unity Alliance shapes up, and we're told that yesterday, KANU's chairman Gideon Moi, ANC's Musalia Mudavadi, Moses Wetangula, Kalonzo Musyoka, started off on a campaign trail to popularize BBI. They were in Western Kenya in Bungoma County, and they hinted at an alliance ahead of 2022, a pre-election sort of coalition alliance to secure the presidency. And so here's what Mudavadi had to say yesterday. From today, we will not allow Moi, Kalonzo, Wetangula and I to walk alone. We will work together and deliver the presidency in 2022. And, you know, indeed, I think they stand a very strong chance of doing so. You know, coming together. These are the political notables that we have in the country. And amongst them, I'm sure, we will have the next president together with Raila in that group. But allow me just to add on a little bit from what I said yesterday about why the deputy president is not good, why William Ruto is not good for Kalenjins. And I'm going to borrow from Bruce Mosquito in the Dictator's Handbook. And what Bruce Mosquito and Alistair Smith in this book tell us is that one of the basic rules that leaders use to stay in power is controlling the flow of revenue. It is better for a ruler to determine who eats than it is to have a larger pie from which the people can feed themselves. And the most effective cash flow for leaders is one that makes lots of people poor and redistributes money to keep their supporters wealthy. And that explains why African politicians, people like Ruto, prefer to keep a majority of their citizens poor. This is the culture of patronage politics I was talking about yesterday, and how the Kalenjin nation has been conditioned for 24 years around that culture of politics. Some of the poorest regions of this country, unfortunately, are places in the Rift Valley, which have had a president for 24 years, and you look at them and you get shocked. Like, really?
Absolutely.
How?
Yes.
Anyway, I say think through that. Between the Star and the Standard, I say we give it to the Star.
I agree.
The Star.
Yes, I'm going to toss the Standard, and the Star gives us our winning headline. Onto the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. There are 3-part criteria that we use to assess them. Are they humorous or dry, satirical or pessimistic, and effective or just plain lazy?
Absolutely.
Shall we begin with the Daily Nation?
Yes, and there is a caricature of the new boss at WTO, World Trade Organization, and her name is Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. She's from Nigeria, and she's the first woman to lead the WTO, the first African to lead the WTO. Now, in terms of the milestones, she's following the footsteps of Barack Obama, who was the first American president. And yes, now the General Council of the WTO agreed by consensus that Okonjo-Iweala Ngozi becomes the 7th Director General of the WTO. Fantastic news, guys.
It is, especially because she's a woman and she's an African.
She's an African.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Big win for Africa.
Yes, for a long time, WTO has played African countries on trade policies, and I think it's time you have someone driving them. I only hope she will not be, influenced by the West.
Yes, and in the Standard, we have a caricature here of Mohisa Kitui, our latest presidential contender for 2022, and is being escorted by officials from DCI who say, we need you to come with us to record a statement about this Robin Hood stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. And the relevance here is of a KTN interview he gave with a journalist, where he was talking about, but I think this was taken out of context, he was talking about the different modes of politics that some presidential candidates are employing right now. And actually, I think this should have been a caricature of Arab Singh. What is his name?
Yes.
Of our very own Arab Mashamba. This should have been his caricature here, because that's what he is perpetuating with
Robin Hood
Hustler dynasty and what have you. Yeah.
Finally, in the Star, we have quite a rude drawing here. We have a drawing of pigs, I'm suspecting. It's a really large, bulbous pig that's in its trough, and it's eating, and the trough is called counties, and it's eating bills. And then it's passing them out as, for lack of a better word, and apparently this is the BBI. And there we have a pig that's Baringo County that's puking it out. I think this is a very negative cartoon, and I think we should toss it as far as we possibly can.
What is that? Is that the Star?
Yes, this is a Star. Ozen from the Star.
Nonsense cartoon.
Kabisa, nonsensical. Do you have a winning cartoon? I don't think we have a winning cartoon. Okay,
let's give it to the nation.
Give it to the nation. Absolutely.
Nation.
I agree.
Absolutely.
And now, on to our final thought. But before we get there, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. So, what is our final thought?
And now, our final thought, it is inspired by a book entitled Why I Am No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Irene Edo Lodge.
This week's theme is Black History Month. And while Black History Month originated in America, we at the Fifth Estate would like to give this month a more global perspective, hence our book choices. In 2014, award-winning journalist Rennie Odo Lodge wrote on her blog about her frustration with the way that discussions about race and racism in Britain were being held by those who weren't affected by it. She titled that blog post, the same title as the book, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. And I'll read the beginning of the post, which is also in the preface to the book. She says, and I quote, I'm no longer engaging with white people on the topic of race. Not all white people, just the vast majority who refuse to accept the legitimacy of structural racism and its symptoms. I can no longer engage with the gulf of an emotional disconnect that white people display when a person of color articulates their experience. You can see their eyes shut down and harden. It's like treacle is poured into their ears, blocking up their ear canals. It's like they can no longer hear us. This emotional disconnect is the conclusion of living a life oblivious to the fact that their skin color is the norm and all others deviate from it. At best, white people have been taught not to mention that people of color are different in case it offends us. They truly believe that the experiences of their life as a result of their skin color can and should be universal. I just can't engage with the bewilderment and the defensiveness that they try to grapple with the fact that not everyone experiences the world the way they do. End quote. Basically, Remy accused white people of willful ignorance, of refusing to recognize structural racism, and of furiously shouting down any proposed reforms. And her words hit a nerve. The post, it went viral, and comments flooded in from other black people who wanted to speak out about their own experiences. Well, Rennie was inspired by this response to explore race issues in the UK. The result of her exploration was published in this book that we are reviewing today, which is a collection of 7 essays about topics like structural racism, class, and feminism.
I love. Now, I love it. Only I don't love my part. Now, when Barack Obama was elected president of the United States, everyone was quick to crow that we were now living in post-racial society. But proclaiming post-racial success was a way to bury any discussion of racism, to insist that we had actually pressed fast forward and everything was okay for now, that there was no need to complain. Endpoint is a new post-racial narrative. The narrative has changed ever so slightly. Post-racial only acknowledged racism of the past and insisted that the present was an anti-racist utopia. Endpoint accepts the racism of the present, but does not want to dwell on it too much, instead hoping that the post-racist utopia is just around the corner. Both are very reluctant to talk about racism. Then she says, often white people ask me very honestly what I think they should do to help end racism. And her response, I think, is ridiculous. She says, white people, you need to talk to other white people about race. Yes, you may be written off as a radical, but you have much less to lose. And this is where I disagree. And I think it is cowardly to expect white people to fix racism by going to tell other white people about racism. I mean, don't white people have better things to do, like walk their dogs? The only way the black man in the West would have gotten even was through 2 ways. First was violence, second, economic emancipation. The only way the Mau Mau got respect from the British is because of the armed resistance they dished out to the colonialists. Now, Prof loves to say that covenants without swords are nothing but mere words. Point is, if the black man was a little more violent, more racist, had more colonial tendencies, was selfish and smiled less, maybe he would be at the top of the racial totem pole. Maybe he would never be phased by racism.
Absolutely. In one of the chapters, she talks about the fear of a black planet. And this is a constant anxiety amongst the Caucasian race, which we trace, in fact, as far back as 2500 BC or even 4000 BC, as we covered yesterday in our book. And so she says the projection of an ever-encroaching black doomsday is what she calls then the fear of a black planet. And it's a fear that the alienated other will take over. So for all these years, they've been alienating the black race. And so they're living in constant fear of revenge, but also in constant fear that we're going to take over and dominate them. And I'm going to quote something here from what she says. And this is in the context of Britain. In 1968, the late Conservative politician Enoch Powell spoke fervently about the ills of immigration. And he said, in this country, in 15 or 20 years' time, the black man will have the whip handed over to the white man. And what she's saying here, basically, is that when this politician was referring to the transfer of power from the black race to the from the white race to the black race, it would be done violently, and the black race would now have the whip to kind of punish the white population. And so she says that word whip conjures images of beatings, of misery, of forced labor, of subjugation, and total dominance. And that is what betrayed the deep-seated feelings of this man, but also the guilt of himself as well as the white community about how they've been treating black people. But then she also says that over time the British society ended up being less sensitive about a race, the black race in particular, and started talking about immigration and the anxieties around immigrants taking over from the indigenous sort of population and culture. And all of it, you know, in the context of just deep-seated anxiety. And I've spoken about this before, that even, for instance, in America, in about 50 years' time, by the year 2050, the minority today are going to become the majority.
Yes.
So there will come a time, even in our lifetime, when the black population will increasingly gain a lot more power in society, economic power, social power. We've seen it with Black Lives Matter in the US, and so on. And there's going to be a bit of a sort of balance in that disequilibrium in power relations between us as the black people and the Caucasians.
Yes.
Hopefully, we'll end up dominating them completely. Yeah.
No, I do want to dominate them.
And the day will come. It's surely coming. It's a question of if, not really when. And on that note, I want to end with a quote by Franklin Roosevelt, who said, "Men are not prisoners of fate, but only prisoners of their own minds." Today we had a winning headline from the Star, and we had a winning cartoon from the Daily Nation. As we close, I want to remind you that we are on YouTube. We are also on your TV screens, Pan Free to Air, Go TV, and Star Times.